this morning before we get started. Good morning. The California schools are facing a great deal of instability that's brought on by a number of issues. They are declining enrollment and some of the things that we will talk about today, continued state budget cuts, inadequate federal funding, our inability to raise monies on local levels are some of the obvious issues, but we want to try to dig deeper if we can to try to determine how should we be addressing this issue. Many of you have been thinking about this question, and I think our children deserve us finding some answers to these questions. I have always said that the issue of education, the issue of California making it one of our top priorities is essential. The future of our children depend on that. So this select committee is attempting to address this issue through a number of hearings that will start today. I would ask my other colleagues whether or not they have some additional comments to make at this point. We are pleased to have join us today and a number of colleagues. First, we have Assemblymember Yamada, and Mr. Yamada, would you like to make any opening statement?
I just want to say good morning. Thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I'm looking forward to hearing the testimony.
Okay, and we also are joined by Assemblymember Paul Cook. Ms. Yamada, of course, is the chair of the Committee on Aging and Long-Term Care, and Mr. Cook is the chair of the Committee on Veteran Affairs. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Would you like to make any comment?
Just very briefly, thank you very much for having me on this on your committee, and just to underscore what you said about the importance of this. With the fiscal challenges and everything like that, maybe it's. Maybe I'm a little more sensitive. I'm going to be terming out here pretty soon, which many of my colleagues will probably cheer. And one of the options I have is I'm going to go back to the classroom. Looking at me, that is, if I can remember who I am. And that's why I always have a name tag in front of me, I guess. But teaching, schools, the environment, it is probably the most challenged it's ever been in California, and of course the problems we have facing that. And everyone agrees on the one thing about doing something about education, and yet every year we end up falling short in terms of delivering. So the importance of this, I think, cannot be underscored, and I applaud your efforts. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Also a member of the committee is Assembly Member Julia Brownlee, who is chair of the Education Committee. And so thank you for your service on the committee. And would you like to make any opening comment about the importance of this issue?
Well, I'm just glad to be a member of, I think, this important committee and this important topic. It is a topic that I'm looking forward to hearing the testimony, important to drill down, understand, to see where we can improve. And hopefully this is not a precursor to what school districts are going to be facing with our economic crisis, and to the degree that we can be proactive and preventive to make sure that schools don't fall into this area, I think is also an area of focus that we need to continue to be vigilant about.
And also joining us today, at least for as much as their time allows, we have Assemblymember Aleo. Thank you so much, sir, for your leadership on this issue. And would you like to make any comment about its importance?
Absolutely. Glad to join the Select Committee for this hearing today. This issue really hits close to home because 3 of school districts that have been taken over by the state are in the 28th Assembly District, one for financial reasons and 2 for academic performance reasons. So we're the first two in the entire history of California where the state took over a school district for non-fiscal reasons. So certainly this is something that has involved so many different community members. People really care about their schools in my district, and so I've got like the most calls and the most involvement around these issues. So certainly something I'm very interested in, and hearing the testimony, and some of the folks testifying today are from my district as well. So glad to participate in this hearing, Chairman.
Thank you. Another one of our distinguished members who's joining us today is Dr. Richard Pan. Thank you so much for being here, Assembly Member, and please, if you'd like to make an opening comment.
Sure. Thank you again, Senator Swanson, for your leadership on this issue. This, I have to admit, is very personal for me. My child just started kindergarten. I just dropped them off today. Today is the first day of school for the Thomas Unified School District, and I know our board chair is going to be presenting today, and of course we're struggling with the difficult financial situation and potential state takeover. So I have to admit this is very personal for me, not only because of my neighborhood, but for my own child who's attending public school and the Thomas Unified School District. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to let the public know that we will be taking public comments. And if you'd like to sign up with the sergeant, we would add you to our agenda today so that we can hear your comments. We appreciate that. The other very important consideration for us is that California is going to have to ask the question at some point, even in light of a budget crisis that we face, and billions of dollars of structural deficit. As a state, what do we stand for? I believe that has to be our children, and it has to be education. If that is the fact, then what's going to be our strategies for going forward and addressing these questions? My hope is that this will be the beginning of a discussion of what has worked in school districts that we have taken over as a state, what has not worked, and how do we prevent additional takeovers, but how do we also focus in on the question of making education a very important priority for our state and helping to secure the future of our children. I would like to call our first panel forward, please.
John Heiber from the State Controller's Office.
Okay. Comments on behalf of State Controller. Very good. Yes, and then the first panel. All right.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thanks very much for the invitation to present at today's hearing. Like you, my child is starting kindergarten as well, so I certainly appreciate where you're coming from. So our comments will focus naturally more on the fiscal and oversight part of the discussion. And so a few points that we wanted to bring up right away is that we recognize the current budget, the 11-12 budget, about 43% of the state general fund has been allocated to K through 12 education. That's more than $36 billion. And as you identified in your opening comments, a significant portion of that is tied to average daily attendance. And during the last decade, most notably since 2004 forward, K through 12 public schools statewide have seen declining enrollments. And as a result of this, many districts are receiving less ADA funding. And so with pressure to maintain spending on the natural and with reduced revenues, regardless of the reason, it could be reduced to ADA funding, as you identified, could be reduced budget allocations, it could be deferrals of payments as well. Some K through 12 districts haven't been able to make necessary financial adjustments to meet these challenges and remain solvent. And this, coupled with many other factors, has resulted in financial challenges for local education agencies. So in simple terms, school districts do experience financial distress when expenditures exceed revenues year over year. When our schools experience this financial distress, existing state law does allow them to seek an emergency apportionment loan. During the past 29 years, $226 million has been allocated in emergency apportionment loans to school districts. Currently, there are 4 districts in California with outstanding emergency apportionment loans, and they are in rank of order of the amount outstanding: Oakland Unified School District, the Vallejo Unified School District, West Contra Costa Unified School District, and the King City Joint Union High School District. 3 of these districts have experienced significant decreases in enrollment: Oakland, West Contra Costa, and to a lesser extent, Vallejo. To receive an emergency apportionment loan, the districts do agree to certain terms and conditions as consideration for the loan. And for these reasons, we feel it's a mischaracterization, really, to refer to the borrower's agreement as a receivership or a state takeover of the school district. When a school district does receive an emergency apportionment loan from taxpayers to assure that the taxpayer funds are expended responsibly, among the conditions the borrower agrees to, number 1, the district must submit to the county school superintendent 3 things: a written financial recovery plan, an independent audit report, and a written management review. The state superintendent of public instruction appoints an administrator or a trustee to monitor and review the operation of the district and to help develop a 5-year recovery plan. This plan is reviewed and approved by the county school superintendent. And the trustee serves until the loan is repaid and the state superintendent determines that the district's future compliance with the fiscal plan is probable. So, for the Controller's Office, for the fiscal year in which the apportionments are dispersed and each year thereafter, the Controller, it says in state law that the Controller shall audit the books and accounts of the school districts, and these audits shall be required until the Controller determines in consultation with the Superintendent that the district is financially solvent. And in addition, the Controller shall conduct quality reviews if those audits are done by another entity besides the Controller's Office. And it's clear from the existing statutes that the intent of the legislature is to encourage sound fiscal management practices among local educational agencies for the most efficient and effective use of public funds for the education of children in California by strengthening fiscal accountability at the district, county, and state level. As the state's chief financial officer of California, the Controller provides independent oversight of taxpayer dollars. The Controller's audit function does assure the legality and accuracy of claims for payment to the state. When claimants seek payments for which they are not entitled to or fail to accurately document expenses, the Controller will deny those payments or seeks reimbursements if the disbursement has already occurred. The Controller cannot abdicate responsibility to aggressively safeguard public funds against waste, fraud, or abuse. When an audit discloses errors, omissions, illegal or inappropriate funds transfers, or simply poor accounting practices, the state often imposes financial penalties. Our goal is to encourage school districts to avoid creating additional financial burdens themselves through the implementation of sound management and accounting practices. Now, the Controller's Office appreciates and understands the existing process can be challenging. Realizing this, we do try to help where we can, but we must follow the law when conducting audits, including those of districts receiving emergency apportionment loans. We would encourage the discussion today to include the following. How can the state encourage school districts to put in place and adhere to sound budgeting and accounting practices so they can operate prudently and avoid the need for loans? And for those schools that do obtain those loans, what we can do to provide support and assistance to assure those funds are expended responsibly and meet accounting and reporting standards in a way to prevent them from incurring penalties that further add to their economic burden. And so I'm available for questions if you have any questions at this time. And as well with me is Jeff Brownfield, our Chief of Division of Audits at the State Controller's Office.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions by the committee? Ms. Brown?
Well, I would just, ask you the question on your last point about, how to audit more responsibly and be, more proactive, to be more efficient and to be supportive of school districts. And if you have suggestions for us around that particular point.
Well, I'd first address that by identifying that when I'm working with staff on audits of school districts, it's clear to me that our audit staff does, there's a fine line between what we can do. We do try to help. We're very empathetic. We understand what's going on here and try to provide assistance where we can. But we're also an oversight agency. And so what I can share with you is we do try to provide that assistance when we can. As to what things we can do statutorily to assist them, I think that's really the purpose of today's hearing. I don't have any recommendations at the moment. Now, Jeff Brownfield, our Chief of Audits, may want to offer something up here. I'm not sure.
What I think the purpose of today's meeting is to explore what avenues are out there, because not only when our office performs audits of school districts, but when other CPAs are out there, the challenge is you do have to report based on what the laws in this building have determined should be audited to. And so if we're finding issues with that, then it rests in this building here to determine what needs to be done to address those issues. And then there is also a level playing field, so to speak. There's several local education agencies, and one would expect that all local education agencies will be treated uniformly throughout the auditing practices.
Okay, other questions? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anytime I engage in sort of a new topic area, it's always helpful for me to kind of get a grasp of how large is this problem. So we have over 1,000 school districts in California, and we have how many that are, you mentioned 6, I believe it was, 4 to 6 districts that are currently in this in the need to make these emergency borrows. That is what we are looking at out of 1,000 school districts right now?
There are 4 right now with outstanding balances, correct?
And I think more importantly than that, just looking at the 4 that are in this situation out of the over 1,000 districts that we have, the tendency, of course, is that they are in income areas that may have experienced other symptoms of poverty or effects of dislocated workers, other factors that relate to the declining enrollment, relate to the lack of financial health of a community. Would that be a fair statement? That it's pretty much related to the overall economic health of a certain area?
I see the link that you're identifying. I'm not sure from a fiscal standpoint we could make that reach. I don't know if Jeff wanted to comment.
Well, I believe for those that have received loans in the past, besides the current ones, they all have similarities to them. I guess more importantly also would be to look at the different school districts that are teetering. They're not quite there. I don't have that in front of me right now.
Right. Actually, that was going to be my next question, that we know of these 4, but then going forward, is there a projection of which districts, and I see the Chair of Education already saying yes, that we know which ones may be teetering on the edge, as you just stated, or on the brink of financial
I think overall,
collapse.
though, if you're looking at, there's over 1,000 local education agencies, and percentage-wise, I think if you're doing an overall percentage, I don't think you're going to say they're all failing or they all have problems, but there's different degrees of ones that have issues, so to speak, right now. And the ones that were discussed are the ones that have received a loan.
Okay. Well, I guess I would just make a final comment that, I guess it was some decades ago that Serrano v. Priest was supposed to address equalization of school finance and funding in our state, and we seem to not have dug ourselves out of the hole because there are many other factors involved in equalizing school finance. But I just want to thank you for helping me understand the problem.
Yeah, I think Mr. Montero, the next speaker, who will be able to answer a lot of these questions, but I do think that more because of the fiscal volatility, because of the volatility in state funding for schools, have put and declining enrollment and deferrals and all the other things that school districts have had to weather over the last couple of years has put even the most well-managed districts in fiscal distress. And certainly if this trigger happens as we move forward, I think it's going to be virtually impossible for school districts to manage cuts and educational funding mid-year. And so the real crisis will come at the end of their next fiscal year because their spending over revenues will just increase exponentially, and we could be looking at really sort of disastrous impacts, in my personal opinion.
I wanted to also welcome Assembly Member Torres for joining us today and the support initiative. Thank you. And Assemblymember Leo had a question.
Yeah, I would agree that with our current financial situation, I think it's a critical time or very good time to have this hearing because I think there's a lot that we could learn from what has happened with the school districts that have been taken over by the state. And also because as we look at this issue, just look at how long some of these takeovers have been in place, some over 10, some over 20 years, and with major implications for local communities because along with the financial takeover, and I say takeover because a lot of power is usurped from your local school board. Your local communities elect leaders to make policy decisions for their local schools, but when the state intervenes and the district is put in receivership, I mean, all the power is taken away from those elected leaders and the voters who put them in office. And so it's a very complicated, a very critical issue for local communities. And with that power that is given to a state administrator, a wide range of policies are put into place, not just financial, but in terms of what courses are offered, a lot of policy decisions that are made beyond the financial. So I think it's critical to look at these 4 districts currently and what lessons they could provide to us for other school districts who might be in the same situation in the next few years. I think another critical question that we're not reviewing today is the distinction between the academic performance school district takeovers. And like I said, there's only been 2, but certainly there's another batch of schools that are kind of in the pipeline for academic performance reason at risk of being taken over by the state. And there's some lessons to be learned by those 2 school districts that have been taken over by the state so far, and what guidance they could provide to us as legislators in terms of how can we make this process better and more equitable for local communities in this situation.
Okay. Thank you for that. Dr. Pan, was there a question?
Actually, again, I want to thank you for your presentation. I do appreciate the Controller's Office expressing the importance of fiscal accountability, and certainly that's very important. However, I think as my colleague Mr. Alejo has mentioned, educational accountability is a piece of this as well, and they're certainly while they're linked, because we have to have the financials to be able to support the education. I think that one of the things, and you talked about, in terms of the oversight and so forth. One of the things, and it's not really so much a question for you, but I think for our future panelists, is to talk about is how do we better engage the people who live in the school district so they feel empowered? Because you talked about the importance of good management and good fiscal responsibility, but I think as was mentioned before, the takeover is not just, you don't want to call it a takeover, but yeah, it is a takeover. You're moving the school board aside, you remove the superintendent, educational policy gets run with the bottom line being first, and that's a very I think that tilts the balance in terms of what we want to think of a school district doing in terms of education and fiscal accountability. And that, while I certainly understand why that perhaps moves in that direction, I think that's really important that we also think about, these are our kids, these their families involved in these in school districts. How do we better empower the people who actually live in the school district and the families who have their children there to be able to work with their school board and the school administrators to be sure that the kinds of decisions that are being made are ones that are in the best interest of the children and their education. And so it's great for us sitting here in the dais and the legislature and people in the various, offices at the state to sit there, but we need to help out the families who often, at least in my school district, have expressed some frustration in feeling very powerless about being able to shape the course of events as our school district has been facing the physical issues that are leading to a potential takeover.
Thank you for that. One of the questions that I have had for a number of years, dealing with the takeover of districts, is this question of accountability that runs both ways for the state in assuming the responsibility as well as the school district. I know that in Oakland, the parents lost no enthusiasm. They continued to pay attention to what was happening to the children and assisting local schools, teachers, putting every effort into trying to make sure that learning was number one priority. The state, under current law, takes responsibility, and it really takes fiduciary responsibility too during the period of time the administrator is on site. But I think that current law is inadequate around this question of audits and responsibility in audits, particularly when it's under the management of the state superintendent and the state, essentially. So there are, as you in your statement said, that there are fines that are levied if the audit finds that there's been some mismanagement around financial issues. And the question becomes, the school board is set aside. The superintendent has legal responsibility under current law. Eventually, the school board comes back, like in Oakland's case, and assumes some responsibility. Should those mistakes be paid for by and the responsibility of the school board that is now assuming responsibility? That is an important question. Or should it be, we want all mistakes corrected, but the fines that have to be paid by a district that was already in trouble, being left for the returning school board to pay, that raises the question of fairness. And I hope that the panels coming forward can address that question so that because the state has to have some responsibility. They can't sort of just go into a district that has some trouble, and when they leave, the district's in worse shape. The assumption is that we're trying to make it in better shape, and we need to know whether or not that this is going to require some legislative relief to address this question. But I was very interested in the controller's opinion about it, and we understand you have to do your job, but the question of accountability, you can imagine the school board that's been sitting on the sidelines. They've made improvements. They're paying their loan on time. Then they assume responsibility, and all of a sudden there are millions of dollars in fines that the state administrator was supervising, and that is an important question. Anyway, so please comment on that if you like.
Well, I know that we've worked with your office on this issue, specifically with the Oakland District, and do feel that we have an understanding of the situation, both on the part of our office in an oversight capacity and with the district and where you're coming from in terms of your comments. And we're more than happy to continue to work with you on this issue, because it does appear that this could be, we could fine-tune this process a little bit and perhaps come up with a policy that satisfies everybody to a greater degree. But again, as I noted in my comments, while we do have an understanding of what's occurring in the district, we're also required to follow the statutes. So, and we've explained that along the way. Having said that, we do realize that perhaps there's an opportunity here from a policy perspective to fine-tune that policy to better satisfy everyone involved.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your openness on that question because it is one that is, I think, it was an oversight in the drafting of the original legislation that looked at this question. I really believe that's true. The other question that I would ask you to think about, if you're not prepared to talk about today, is that are there ways that since there are so many districts that are on the verge of insolvency, to interrupt that process with out of some kind of task force or some other kind of intervention from your perspective that may either do a risk analysis to help that school district as we see problems that have been flagged as issues for other school districts.
Which they'll be talking to you later this morning, but FICMET, that was part of the development of them to assist in those areas.
Okay, thank you, and that's true. So our last question comes from Assemblymember Torres.
On the issue of the fines, the State Controller's Office has put forward numerous bills over the time that I have been here. Why hasn't this been an issue that your office has begun to address? Or why hasn't there been an interest to ensure that these fines are somehow frozen during the time that the state has taken over the district? Why has that not been a priority from your office?
Well, I do believe, thank you for the question, I do believe it is. Naturally today it's a very high priority.
I was hoping that you would say that because of today, all of a sudden it didn't become a priority. I was hoping that you would have an answer like, we have been looking at it, and these are the reasons why it hasn't been a priority for us. That would be, I would think, the responsible way to answer this question.
I understand. We have worked with your office, Assemblymember Swanson's office, for it's been, I think now, for more than 6 months on this issue. And I know in months past, internally, we've identified this issue and been devoting time to it from a policy perspective to evaluate this. The time is ripe to take a look and see what we can do here, and we're willing to take a seat at the table and try to provide what assistance we can. But we certainly appreciate your concerns.
And I would say parenthetically that we do have a bill to try to address this question, and to the extent the Controller Office can use its influence to help us move that bill out of Assembly appropriations forward, so that we can address this basic question of fairness. And so this is an issue that I raised, and with those motives in mind, to address this question of fairness. Anytime we take responsibility, and we're trying to provide education opportunity for the children. It is really the children who we're trying to benefit here. Now, we can't sort of just react to audit findings and not hold those who were responsible for the findings accountable. And if in this case there's the state, then the state can't be held responsible for the error, but then take the fines from the district that they were supposedly helping, which results in punishing the children that should not be punished in this case, and the school board that was sitting at the sideline without any legal authority to come back. And so we think this is an obvious fix. We hope that the Controller's Office would work with us on this so that we can approach leadership to address this question. It is just a question of fairness. And with that, is there any other questions? If not, would you like any closing statement or as you like to make as you leave?
No, but thanks again for the invitation to speak today, and I assure you that this is a high priority for our office.
Thank you. And we thank the Controller's Office for being responsive to our earlier questions but this is an important issue for us. We're going to be holding hearings throughout the state on these very important questions to try to learn from the school districts currently under takeover and also the school districts on the verge of takeover, so we can learn how to do this right and to benefit the children. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
I would ask the next panel to come forward. If you could call the names, please.
Joel Montero, Executive Director of FICMAT. Jeannie Oropeza, California Department of Education. Edgar Cabral, Legislative Analyst Office. Cassandra Moore Hudnall, State Controller's Office.
Thank you very much. We thought we'd warm it up for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Director Antonio, if you would start for us, please.
Sure. Thank you. Joel Montero, Chief Executive Officer, Fiscal Crisis Management Assistance Team. My youngest son starts college tomorrow. CSU San Francisco. They grow up and it gets more expensive, just so you know. Let me just give some very brief background and in terms of some of the questions that have already been asked. The state of California, AB 1200 implemented in 1991. Since that time, 8 insolvencies, those are cash insolvencies in California, have occurred. So in a 20-year period, about 8 of those, as somebody mentioned before, 1,000 or so school districts in California, so you can work out the percentages in your head. The total of emergency appropriations, somewhere in the neighborhood, the controller mentioned about $224 million over time, which is a lot of money. It's important to note that the emergency appropriations are really cash appropriations. They're intended for cash flow purposes when these districts go insolvent. This is not a matter necessarily in real time of budget, but rather cash. And so the ability to make payroll is generally the issue that triggers the insolvency at any given time. About $171 million of those dollars currently outstanding. State has currently 2 state administrators still assigned, and that would be the most extreme level of state intervention, and 3 state trustees that are assigned. Remember that this is that the state takeover, and it is a takeover. The state takeover is a broader piece or a portion of the AB 1200 process, which is a sequential process, basically organized and run in a cooperative fashion, we hope, between county offices of education and school districts. And I kind of always think about AB 1200 on a scale of 1 to 10. The least interventive piece, which is a qualified certification, is helpful, tries to get the budget put back together and move the district back into the direction of solvency in a very collaborative and cooperative way. The most extreme version of that, of course, is state takeover. So on a scale of 1 to 10, that would be a 10. It is, in my view, after being involved in all 8 of them in California over my years in education, should be avoided at all cost. Our objective is always, and I think the objective of school districts and county offices of education, is to avoid state takeover. Why we've only had, or I say only, why we've had 8 over that period of time, I think that is a testament to the oversight process relative to AB 1200, but at the same time, when the 8 occur, the impact of that at the local level can be devastating in terms of loss of governance control. If you believe that school districts are best run locally, and we do, you lose that governance process and the impact on children's education at that particular point. We currently, as of second interim last year, so that would be as of January 31st of 2011, last budget year, we have 13 negative certification districts. You could argue that those are the districts at this point that are most close to insolvency, and I would agree that they are. Negative certification is always a cash certification. So for those are districts that may not be able to meet their financial obligations for the current plus 1 year. In addition to that, we have 130 at second interim qualified certification districts. So these are districts that would be at the next level. If you want to use the number line analogy, they would be about at a 4 or 5. negative certification districts somewhere around an 8. So the next step for them, should they not improve, would be to move closer to a state intervention or state takeover. We have a new budget, and of course, as of July 1st, or shortly after that, after the 45-day period of budget adjustment after the budget was approved, school districts going in now and readjusting their budgets, budgeting on the revenue side, basically prior year revenues. And so that will help many of them in this particular year as they move forward, notwithstanding, as Ms. Brownlee says, the trigger language, which everyone in the field, I spend every day out in the field, frankly, in school districts, and I will tell you in no uncertain terms, there is a high level of concern and anxiety around that issue as we get closer and closer to that trigger date. As the news related to not only the national economy but the state's economy continues to have problems, people are very concerned about that particular issue. So again, remember a couple of important things to remember about state takeovers. They only occur when you run out of cash. So there is some connection between cash and budget, and generally speaking, you get into cash problems after multiple years of budget unbalance. And so this doesn't happen quickly. It's something that is foreseen generally through the process. Best practices try to avoid the situation, but often it does move forward. It's basically related to multiple years of deficit spending. State takeover should be the last final resort when there is absolutely no other option. And unfortunately, again, school districts, or fortunately, school districts are generally best run locally, and when you lose governance process, you lose a big part of the process at the local level. But remember also that state takeovers are after a series of what would have been a series of attempted interventions that either, for whatever reason, were not successful or failed. So oftentimes not for lack of trying, but circumstances might conspire one way or another as we look forward to future insolvencies. These 13 negative certification districts that we have, I would say 2 of those are in critical condition today and are likely failures within the next 12 months. Sometimes in an era where we have a good amount of cash being deferred to school districts, it exacerbates that problem. So if you're a small or tiny school district and you don't have a lot of economy of scale and cash flow, if you're rural, if your revenue limit tends to be among the lower revenue limits, then sometimes there's just nothing you can do if you get yourself in that particular point. And we will see some of those moving forward as we begin to look out in the future. So how does it work? Well, it works best. It works after a fashion, and it works best when the intervention at that most extreme level is as brief as possible. That we rebuild capacity at the local level, that we do whatever we can do to ensure solvency moving forward, that we do the cash flow analysis, create a plan to fix the problem, and that the intervention at the most extreme level, which is the replacement of the superintendent and having the board advisory, is short-lived. That's when it works best. The longer it goes on, and I've always said, and some of you have heard me say this before, when state takeover begins to look like the norm in a community rather than the exception, we run into problems. And so being efficient in the work that we do, being thoughtful, being cooperative, collaborative, trying to get back on track to do what we have to do, and that generally means stopping deficit spending, rebuilding reserves, and having a fund balance, particularly in the general fund, unrestricted, that trends positive. Those are kind of the 3 legs of the 3-legged solvency stool. And then transition to a trustee, which is a less severe level of intervention. The state has held that as long as a school district has a balance in their loan, that there has to be some level of oversight through the Department of Education, and that is in the form of a trustee. The board is in place during that circumstance or situation. A superintendent is rehired during that situation, but that trustee still continues to have stay and rescind authority in case things run afoul. And so that's the protection that the state under statute believes that it needs to move forward. What's the best, one of the questions on our panel is, how do we improve the system? What's our best option? Well, the best option is the preventative option. Someone said it earlier in the prior testimony. To the extent that we can continue to operate on a best practices perspective financially in our local organizations, to the extent that our budgets are balanced, that we maintain reserves, that we use multi-year projections to monitor the health of the system in the out years, to the extent that we can prevent state takeover, this most extreme level of intervention from occurring, that's our best hedge. And so making sure and looking at the current law and statute to determine that what we do have in place tries to achieve that end. That's essential and important in my view. Again, I'll repeat, when it does occur, in the unfortunate circumstance that state takeovers do occur, to the extent that we move quickly, that we intervene, that we're effective in our intervention, that we work collaboratively among the parties that are involved, and try to move to the next step, the district back to the direction of solvency and the governance system back to some level of normalcy within building the capacity among staff and the boards also is the important thing to do. Little fly in the ointment at this particular point for the last 4 or 5 years, including the emergency appropriations King City and Vallejo, the most recent two. We now fund emergency appropriations through a process that works through the Infrastructure Bank in California. That makes the loans very expensive for school districts, and so I will give you the example of King City, which is the most recent. King City is a high school district of a little bit more than 2,000 children and 2 comprehensive high schools. When they received the loan, their general fund unrestricted balance was about $16 million or so, $16 million and change. Their emergency authorization for appropriation was $13 million. So, as is the nature and the case these days, that the agreement and cooperation with the Infrastructure Bank was entered into between the district, the Department of Education, and the I-Bank, and bonds are sold in this model to investors to raise the capital to make the emergency appropriation. That's how it works. And so the bondholders are paid, it's an investment for them, so they're paid interest. And because of that, it's very difficult to prepay the loan early. So in the case of Compton, in the case of Coachella Valley, those districts all paid their loans back early because they could, because they were loans from the state's, California's general fund. Very low interest rate, no cost of issue, no issue with these investors to deal with. So right off the bat, you can't really prepay, which is a problem with the process that we're in now. The second thing is it's a market interest rate. So in the old days, we would charge, or the state would charge school districts, in the case of Oakland, the interest rate that was equal to the pooled investment fund for the state, 1%, half, maybe 1.5% too sometimes. And so that kept the debt service payments lower. And also, there's no cost of issue when we were borrowing from the state. So in this environment, we have a situation now in King City, which is a small district, with a emergency appropriation that is very large in relationship to its general fund unrestricted, with a debt service of about $1.3 million a year. So think about it. You have now, today, about a $15 million general fund unrestricted. Before they do anything, they scrape off $1.3 million to pay this debt service payment. They're going to have a very difficult time recovering in the long term. And the fact of the matter, as we move forward, while you might be able to create somewhat of a profile of past emergency appropriations, the reality is moving forward, the districts that are struggling the most tend to be small, rural school districts or tiny rural school districts that have no economy of scale. And so this issue that we have now in King City with a high debt service rate is going to continue I think, to be repeated. Finally, in terms of improving the process, communication is always an issue. in these circumstances. And creating and maintaining positive communication when the takeover happens between the state, the local district, and others who were involved, other parties in the process, seems to me to be essential. We always point to the Emory Unified School District as a positive example of a district that where we got in and got out fast. And one of the reasons that occurred was because the communication among the board, the state administrator initially, the trustee, FCMAT, others that were involved, Department of Education, was just excellent. And everybody got on the same page quickly, and for whatever reason, it worked well. So, with that.
Thank you, Mr. Montero. This issue of debt service is a very important one, and how these loans are structured.
Right.
And so we will make it a point to examine that question very closely. And there's really no need for these to be high interest loans because the payments are guaranteed.
Well, the payments the loans are underwritten basically by the state of California. And so the state of California is, from the iBank's point of view, going to make good on those loans, certainly moving forward. Again, the issue there is, how do you raise the capital? In the old days, we raised the capital using the state's general fund. That was the capital position. These days, you have to raise capital by selling to investors. And so they're going to demand a return on their investment that is at least consistent, given that it's a safe investment, that is at least consistent with what they could earn by putting their money somewhere else. That's why we have the higher interest rate now.
Yep.
So, and of course, everybody understands, and I think it goes without saying, one of the reasons that the state went to that format is because the state's general fund, at least today, is not particularly healthy. And how many state loans can you absorb over the time? You heard the numbers from the controller and from me. It's $200 million plus is a lot of money.
For these school districts, it's the first payment that's made. I mean, it comes off the top. So
yeah.
In terms of the money, there being a risk of default, there's to the extent that the school district is generating revenue, then that payment's going to be made. And it just seems to me that the structuring of that has to be more sensitive. Other than that, it takes on the characteristics of being predatory.
Yeah.
And so I think that we have to address that question. The other,
and part of the issue is when loans were made from the state's general fund. Let's take Oakland in your assembly district, for example. You only paid debt service on the amount that you borrowed. Now, you may eventually borrow the entire amount, but while you were in the formative parts of state takeover, if you only borrowed $30 million, you paid debt service on $30 million. In the case of the iBank, you paid debt service on the entire amount from day one because those bonds have been sold. Those investors expect a return. So again, it's a change in the nature, and it's made it more difficult for districts. If we all agree that our objective is for districts to recover, and I hope it is, then the situation or the circumstance that we find ourselves in now makes that process more difficult.
Well, can I get you to comment on this question of when, at the end of the loan, when a district has made progress, and we bring in an administrator, and then we bring in a trustee to sort of vote. The school board gets authority back, and we bring in a trustee to sort of look over their shoulders.
Yes.
Well, is there any advantage to, like in the 13 districts that are facing insolvency, potentially insolvency, or we find a school district in trouble, to have an effective but a softer approach where the school board is not replaced immediately, but there is some help that comes in early in the process in the form of financial support and a trustee to help, and maybe some other corrective actions on the front end, so that it's not automatically a death penalty for the school board, and the district turned upside down is the only choice to receive any kind of financial support. Have you thought about that? Is there any thought about something like that working?
Well, FICMAT's not a policy entity, but you couldn't help but think about those things, as you get inside school districts and do this work. And what I would say about it is, in my experience, the most critical time in state takeover is in years 1 and 2. That's where that's where the die is sort of cast. And depending upon how effective the analysis and planning, the creation of the fiscal recovery plan is in that formative situation, that early part of the involvement or the intervention really is going to dictate how well that district recovers. And a piece of that, so what I would say is a piece of that is absolutely building capacity within the board for understanding fiduciary responsibility and governance, and building capacity, maybe even more importantly, among staff to do the right things in terms of best practice.
Okay, Ms. Brownlee, and then Mr. Litt.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up to one of Mr. Swanson's questions, and I'm certainly very sensitive to the wall of debt issue that California faces and so forth, and this iBank issue that you described. I mean, what other than the debt issue, what was the driving force to move from a general fund allocation to this other structure with the iBank? I mean, was that our decision?
It was via, I believe it was AB 2756, Ms. Dauscher's bill in the late 90s. After the insolvency of Vallejo, there were some changes made to the process, and this was one of the changes that was made at that time. As I say, we're not a policy group, so I'm not sure what the debate was around that or what the whys and wherefores were, but actually Jeannie may be better positioned to answer that than me.
It seems to me, anyway, that we should take it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, it's one thing to have a very large district, but in the case of the small district, King City, that you spoke about, it just seems to me that it would be more beneficial to the school district and to the state to make a general fund allocation under that circumstance. So it seems as though we should be really looking at this on a case-by-case basis and not by a policy that's driving it, that's maybe insensitive to changing economic times.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I know that Jeannie's going to speak to some of those issues, but I would say that if you look at the environment that we find ourselves in today, which we all know is going to continue for a bit, this model may not have really been conceived or created for the kind of situations we're going to find ourselves in over the next 12 to 24 months. And so having some other options, it seems to me, would be prudent at this particular point, because, believe me, as time goes on, if you look at the past 20 years and if you project forward in the next 20, we will have school districts that will fail. And they fail for a variety of reasons. And in those situations where it's clear that the failure was related to not paying the correct attention to budget process, not implementing best practice, not being fiscally responsible, then this process is a legitimate process. But in the situation we find ourselves in today, where the numbers are likely to increase, going out for each one of those and creating an iBank loan and putting in a state administrator, first of all, there aren't that many state administrators, might not be in the best interest of either the state or the local entity.
Okay.
But it seems, too, as close, if we do get closer and closer to this trigger perspective, that it would be important, I think, at that time for the state to analyze a general fund allocation vis-a-vis creating more debt and higher interest payments for the state to make in the long term, and should look at that and analyze that and balance that.
Just so you're aware, in the districts, some of the districts I think probably have, but there's some language in AB 114 in terms of their planning forward relative to the trigger language. But our staff has gone into every one of the current 13 negative certs and done the analysis were the trigger to be pulled. And we think that of the 13, probably 11 of them fail.
Okay, we're gonna have Mr. Leo. I think has a question, and then we're gonna move forward with this, Mr. Leo. First, yeah.
Well, I was just going to reiterate the lessons learned from King City, which is in my assembly district. It speaks volumes because that interest rate is probably over 3 times what it is for any other school district. And again, it's really hurting the quality of education because hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent on making that interest payment rather than reducing the principal quicker and not devastating other critical services. Because then it results on a disaster on the local level because people expect certain things. Sorry about that. People expect certain things to continue in their schools, and because of such a high interest payment, they're losing those services. But also, the state in the long run is end up paying that, is making those payments. Whereas if it had fronted that loan, the school district would get out of receivership quicker, and the community, the process on the local level, and having those services that they expect wouldn't be such a controversy as well. And the last thing was, because you haven't mentioned on what your oversight role is, what FCMAC does in terms of reviewing that state administrator every year. What are the checks and balances there? Because there seems to be a conflict. When the state puts an administrator, as long as that administrator is still there and making a recommendation to stay in, his work continues, his contract gets extended, and it could go on for many years. And as you mentioned, I agree with it, is when it's very brief, the intervention is very brief, and the state could exit at the earliest possible time. I think that's a good model that should be made as part of the policy in terms of these state takeovers.
And I'm going to let Jeannie address that. The state administrators don't work for us, nor are they assigned by us. So that's a Department of Education, I think, position.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Montero. The statements were helpful to us as a committee. We're going to follow up on all these very, very important issues. It's clear that these cannot and should not be predatory loans in any way, and we should do everything we can to make sure those that are currently operating these loans obviously are making money, and it seems to me there's a better way to structure it so that in the end the kids do not pay for it by a lack of resources. So we will move on to Ms. Opeza.
Gina Opeza, Deputy Superintendent for Superintendent Tom Torlakson.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here. I'm going to walk through the schools that we're in and then give you a quick history of those and then go ahead and tell you which ones we were in and have exited from. So currently, in no particular order, but we'll start with Oakland here. We took control of Oakland in 2003. The loan was $100 million. Currently, all powers have been returned to the school district, and we have a fiscal trustee currently in that district. Vallejo City Unified School District was taken over in 2004. The loan was $60 million. All powers except for financial management have been returned to the board. Let me just take a step back in case, to give you some context. So when FCMAT initially goes in and does a report of the school district once it gets taken over, they look in 5 specific areas. They look at financial management, community relations and governance. They look at academic achievement, facilities management, and human resources, so personnel. So those are the 5 areas that they look at. And they are required under law to do a report. Back to your question, Assemblymember Alejo, they do a report on the district, and they focus on these areas, and they have criteria that they go through for each of those areas. And depending on how they score and what the issues are, then we know we need a trustee or we need an administrator. And in the case of Oakland initially, it took several years before the report came back and said that we should return powers to the governing board. And so over time, we rely on their reports, and based on what their reports say is how, we decide whether or not to step out. But one of the first things that the superintendent tells any administrator that goes in is that their primary role is to get themselves out of there as quickly as possible. We do not want to be in there any longer than we need to, again, because there's not a lot of administrators or trustees out there that we can go to. So the quicker we go in, the quicker we return powers, the better off the situation is, and we recognize that, and I concur with everything that Joel said. So as I indicated, back to my initial, so Vallejo City, again, we returned all powers except for financial management. There are still some issues in that area that still need oversight. There's a trustee for everything else. Trustee simply can stay or rescind decisions made by the board. West Contra Costa Unified took a loan in 1991. It was for $28.5 million. All powers have been returned to that board, and we have a trustee at this point. The loan is expected to be repaid in 2018. However, we believe that they have the resources to actually pay off the loan, but they have to make that decision whether or not they're going to pay it off earlier or not. King City is the most recent district that we've gone into, and we went in 2009. They had a loan for $13 million. Currently, there is a state administrator there, and all of the powers are under the administrator's control at this point. The loan is expected to be repaid in 2028. We were previously in West Fresno Elementary School District. They were taken over in 2003, and their loan was $1.3 million. They've since gone back to local control. Emory Unified, 2001, $1.3 million loan. Again, they've paid back their loan and are back under local control. Compton Unified was taken over in 1993. Their loan was $20 million. We've since returned control to that district as well. And the last is Coachella Valley Unified. We took over in 1992. The loan was $7.3 million, and they've since been restored their control. A couple of the issues that Joel talked about, the iBank, and in my former hat with the Department of Finance, the decision was made at the time because we were looking at Oakland, a $100 million loan. We were having fiscal difficulty back in 2003-04 as well. And Los Angeles Unified looked like they were very close to potentially having difficulties as well. And so at the time, the decision was made that the state would provide the initial investment to pay the initial cash, emergency cash, and then the district would go through the iBank process to repay the state for their short-term loan, where in the past these were long-term loans up to 20 years that the state would get repaid over time. And the interests varied depending on what the current interest rates were for the state. The other piece with the iBank, because there are our current fiscal situation, perhaps you can consider a threshold, where if the loan doesn't exceed a certain amount, then the state can consider providing the initial loan. Anything above that amount, I don't know what that level would be. I think it's going to depend on input from the Controller's Office, the Treasurer's Office, Department of Finance, because of our cash flow situation. And this would be a long-term loan, but something that can be considered. The other piece is because we are in the current fiscal situation that we're in, and it looks like more districts may be in fiscal distress, we really need to look for a new process for these situations. In these districts that we're currently talking about, there were, in some cases, very serious problems with controls, like their personnel, and in some cases, districts were sending out checks to people that didn't work for the district. They had hundreds and hundreds of cell phones that they couldn't account for. So their internal controls were lacking, and in these various areas that I talked about. So in those cases, it makes sense to send somebody in and help the district recover from that situation. But if a district simply is taken over because of the current fiscal situation, there's nothing wrong with their internal controls. They have good accounting practice. They have good budgeting practices. There just isn't enough money coming and largely cash flow because of the deferrals, because of other issues, then we should have another process for that situation, because I just don't think that we're going to have enough resources or the ability to go into every district, nor should we be in every district, because their issue is largely driven by the state's fiscal situation. So I think that's one thing that we really need to look at as we go through this process.
I was just going to say, I bet Mr. Swanson has a bill, right?
Thank you.
So those are all my
Okay, but thank you very much. We're going to hear from the rest of the panelists, and then we'll go back for questions as we move on and try to move the hearing forward to some of our other panels. Please.
Edgar Cabral with the Legislative Analyst Office. Just like to make some brief comments. First, talking a little bit about the major issues related to the budget that would affect the likelihood of districts going insolvent, some importance of the early warning system, and then to talk a little bit about the current process. I won't go through, there was a handout passed out, but I won't go through the whole thing. I'd like to just direct you to the last page, page 6, that highlights some of the major issues that could affect district solvency in the future. I think the big issues really are things that have been discussed through the budget process for the past few years. The first thing to keep in mind is that though there have been significant budget reductions over the past few years, there was one-time federal funding that had been available to school districts. That should all be exhausted by the end of the 11-12 fiscal year, so that won't be an option anymore for districts to tap into. The state has also adopted significant payment deferrals. There was another $2.1 billion payment deferral in 11-12. What that means at this point, for the 2011-12 fiscal year, 21% of the funding that districts have for the 11-12 fiscal year is being paid late. And so that's placing a significant burden on school districts in terms of cash. And as Mr. Montero pointed out earlier, negative certification and eventually going in for a loan is really a cash issue. So as districts feel additional cash pressure, that could lead to somebody needing to come in for an emergency loan. Additionally, because of the budget reductions, and not the budget reductions, but the triggers within the budget, there are some potential problems for school districts. The state essentially had language requiring districts to assume flat funding and suspended some of the summer layoff provisions for that often can be triggered that would allow districts to lay off some staff in the summer months. So what that's done is districts have built budget plans assuming that the funding will be provided. If the trigger cuts do happen, that would be a total of $1.7 billion in reductions to school districts. The state law does allow school districts to reduce the school year by 7 days if the trigger cuts do occur. However, in order to make that happen, they need to go meet with their bargaining units and be able to negotiate for reduction in the school year in the middle of the year. And given that the reductions, the triggers wouldn't be known until January or February, then it seems very unlikely that districts would be able to respond this year. So what we think is likely is that many districts will just rely on reserves if trigger cuts do happen. And 12-13 will be a very difficult time because districts will have lost a lot of the reserves that they maybe had that could have helped them out at that point. So those are kind of the bigger financial issues to keep in mind. I do want to talk a little bit about the importance of our AB 1200 process and the negative and qualified certifications. I think in prior years when we've been in difficult budget times, there's always been push to find ways to exempt the state from, or find ways so that we wouldn't classify districts necessarily because of state fiscal problems. So for example, just because a district dipped into their reserves due to a greater fiscal crisis, that shouldn't mean that the district should be labeled qualified or negative because it wasn't their fault. And I think we understand, that there is this negative connotation associated with being negative or qualified, but the point of this process is it's an early warning system, and it doesn't really matter whose fault it is. It's really important for the state to be aware of what's going on, and for folks like FICMAT to be able to go in and look at what's going on. So I think it's really important. It's not, it's like knowing that you might be sick, and so not going to the doctor because you don't want to tell you that you're sick. It doesn't really matter, was it your fault or not that you were sick. You should go into the doctor to figure out how you can get better. So I think we really would like to emphasize that the state should not move in the direction of, the warning system should stay in place no matter what happens, what budget cuts are. We need to know regardless of whose fault it is. The last thing I'd like to talk about is about the process of the emergency loan and the going through the infrastructure bank. One thing to keep in mind also, if you're thinking about worst case scenario, potentially 11 districts coming in for loans. One of the other problems with this system is that there's a lot of time required to go out and issue the loans. The state has to provide the funding up front while the iBank process goes through. You prepare all the documents to go out and issue the bonds. Well, if you have 11 districts going out and issuing bonds, that's going to be a lot of work. Does the state have the capacity to churn those out very quickly? Also, is there going to be sufficient demand from investors to lend money to 11 districts who have needed emergency appropriations? These are all issues that could occur. The system might not have been designed for that many school districts going under at the same time. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you get to volumes of this level, it might be difficult under the current process to be able to go through and issue all these loans for all districts.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to hear from the Controller's Office again.
Yes, hi, I'm Cassandra Moore Hudnall. I'm Audit Chief with the Controller's Office. And I was going to talk about, how the system works with respect to audits. For state districts without state loans, or districts in general, they all must have an annual audit, and that audit covers financial statements, state and federal compliance. The audits must be performed by certified public accountants. The CPA must follow government audit standards, federal, state single audit requirements, and a K-12 audit guide. The auditor's report must include a summary of audit exceptions and recommendations. And if a district is not in compliance with a requirement that's a condition of eligibility to receive state funds, the auditor must report that fact. Now, districts with state loans are subject to the same requirements for audit, except the Controller's Office assumes the responsibility for the audit. The Controller essentially takes over the independent audit or works with the district to designate a firm to perform the audit. And the reason the Controller has been put in that capacity is because generally the time and the extent of the audit increases significantly when a district needs a state loan due to fiscal mismanagement, and that the Controller is completely independent of the district, and the results of the audit cannot be influenced by threat of withholding of payments for the contract or for firing. So for the past 29 years, all districts receiving emergency loans have been audited by the State Controller's Office. It had been our practice to audit until the state loan was paid off, but beginning about 10 years ago, we changed our policy to evaluate the district at the end of each audit and determine whether the district has made a progress in implementing sound internal controls and correcting areas of noncompliance. So, for example, with regard to Emory Unified School District, which has been put up kind of as a model, after 2 years, we found that the district had implemented strong internal controls and corrected areas of noncompliance, so we worked with them to have an independent auditor perform the audit. With respect to West Fresno Elementary School District, after 6 years, because they took significant corrective actions and made significant improvements, we had them go and work with an independent auditor for their annual audit. And we do expect that Vallejo City Unified School District will be able to seek an independent auditor after the end of the fiscal year 10-11 audit, because they have made significant strides and a commitment in implementing internal controls. What we do if a firm is performing the audit of any of these districts is we periodically perform quality control reviews to assess the independent auditor's work and ensure that they're performing their audit in accordance with government audit standards and state and federal requirements. Regardless of who's performing the audit, whether it's the controller's office or an independent auditor, audit findings and question costs must be reported if the auditor is following government audit standards and state and federal requirements. Noncompliance with certain federal or state requirements may result in the district having to repay funds or pay a penalty. And if it's a state finding and the finding is considered apportionment significant, then the district can file an appeal with the Education Audit Appeals Panel. And the panel can determine whether or not the district substantially complied with the compliance requirement and either reduce the audit finding or overturn the audit finding, or they can refer the appeal to the Office of Administrative Law for a hearing. And then once the appeal is heard, the panel can either accept or reject the administrative law judge's decision. Auditors are not to determine whether a district is in substantial compliance, nor are they to negotiate any findings. Auditors are responsible for reporting when a district is not in compliance with state or federal law. Some suggestions for improvement are that when a district receives an emergency loan, there should be a commitment made and action taken to implement and maintain strong internal controls. District staff should be evaluated, especially fiscal services staff should be evaluated for competency, and any individuals tasked with ensuring compliance with state and federal requirements should also be evaluated, and the district should be providing training, support, and if necessary, incompetent staff should be replaced. We found that if an internal auditor is immediately hired and there are sufficient resources in place, that it helps the district move towards basically being able to comply with laws and implement strong internal controls. And that independent auditor or that internal auditor should report to a state administrator and not to the district management who is responsible for financial and fiscal services. We would also recommend that an audit committee be established that is made up of advisory or governing board members who understand the concept of audits and recognize that it is actually the district staff who are responsible for the accounting records, the financial statements, and compliance with federal and state requirements. The district should immediately implement corrective action when an issue is brought to management's attention. So, for example, we provide, during the course of our audits, biweekly status reports. And we discuss at those status meetings issues that we found during the course of our audits. And so the district is fully aware of what those issues are throughout the course of the audit. They should utilize Department of Education resources and then make audits a priority, take them seriously, and consider the audits as feedback and consulting on areas that can be improved. The district should also continually mentor, train, and develop district staff.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. We're going to wrap this panel up and move quickly to the next panel. Is there any pressing questions? We hope that all of you would be available. This is our first hearing, and we want to invite you back as we dig down deeper into these issues and hopefully lead to some policy considerations. We really appreciate the work of all of you. And Mr. Montero, thank you so much for the time that you have given us and also outside the meeting. So thank you very much. We'd ask our next panel to come forward.
Mary Perry, Ed Source, Dr. John Bernard, King City Joint Union High School District, Bruce Roberts, Natomas Unified School District.
Yeah, and we, thank you. We, please have a seat. We're going to, it's clear that this is a very important issue, and we probably could spend the next 10 hours discussing it. And so, but out of respect for all of you and for those that have also come to testify today, we would ask you to summarize your statements for us, provide us with written material, and also be available for us as we go forward with future hearings. So why don't we begin? And if we can keep the statements to a couple of minutes each, and then we'll get to some questions. I appreciate it. Okay.
All right. I'm Mary Perry, and I'm Deputy Director at EdSource. And in 2006, EdSource completed a study about the financial management of school districts, and I believe the members of the committee have a copy of the summary of the study. And what I want to do is very quickly address Assemblywoman Brownlee's issue of prevention, because that's what the study focused on, prevention of financial distress for school districts. Our study looked at two questions that are really most relevant for this hearing. One of them was, how can you identify a district that's fiscally healthy or unhealthy? And then what characteristics or conditions do we see in healthy districts? And we worked with School Services of California and FCMAT, based first on the assumption that if we looked at the AB 1200 certifications over the course of 3 years, from 2002-3 through 2004-5, that we'd be able to easily identify districts that were fiscally healthy or unhealthy, and we had a middle category called marginal. Turns out that in that time frame, when districts were already facing serious volatility in state funding and real issues around budget solvency, 88% of districts had only had a positive certification. So we thought that that actually under-identified the districts that were having trouble, and there was lots of reason to believe that was true, including districts that had gone from never having a negative or qualified certification under AB 1200 to an emergency loan status. And so we looked at another set of indicators that I just want to put forward to the committee. Those factors were deficit spending and the level of reserves that a district reported. Those are both part of districts' normal financial reporting, looking back at their past practice instead of the AB 1200 approach, which is really focused on prospective planning. And we found as a result of that that about half of school districts fell into the fiscally healthy category. 28% fit our description of marginal, and 18% of school districts in 2006, or 176 districts, we could identify as fiscally unhealthy. So it really spoke to the fact that there are some other pieces of information out there that may help with this process. Our study also asked about the characteristics of districts that were fiscally healthy. You can look at the study and get a feel for the kinds of operations and practices that are part of those districts. And it was an interesting look at a topic that doesn't always get a lot of attention, and it may have some other value for the committee in your work going forward.
Thank you so much. Right under 2 minutes. So thank you very much.
That's good.
Thank you very much. The next speaker, please.
Yes, my name is John Bernard. I'm the state administrator for what was the King City Joint Union High School District, and now it is called the South Monterey County Joint Union High School District. And I do have a binder for the members, the assembly members here, because I'm referencing some FCMAT paragraphs, and I'm referencing some items that are in the Senate Bill 130.
Thank you. We accept that for the record, and we'll review it.
Thank you.
Thoroughly.
So, as you have already heard in Senate Bill 130, sponsored by Senator Denham and co-authored by Caballero, even though there was multiple years of fiscal difficulties in the King City Joint Union High School District, the Senate Bill 130 enumerated that there were other areas that the State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the State Administrator would be involved with: financial management, pupil achievement, personnel management, facilities management, and community relations and governance. It also differs from previous state takeovers in that it specifically states and requires that there is training for the Board of Education and staff who have management and personnel policy making and advisory responsibilities to ensure that the district's leadership team had the knowledge and skills to discharge their responsibilities effectively. It also required that there be ethics training for the Board of Education and for district leaders. We've already talked about the iBank, so I won't go into great detail, but the Senate Bill 130 goes into great detail about the iBank. Currently now, the loans that are in the other districts that have been taken over by the state are less than 2% interest, and for King City, the South Monterey County High School District, it's 5.44%. As Joel Montaro already referenced, our debt service is $1.26 million a year, and it'll be
$23 million to pay off a $13 million loan over 20 years. And in that process, we had to put up one of our schools as collateral. It's almost like refinancing your house. We had to refinance the district, and one of our high schools now is collateral.
Kids included?
Not yet, not yet. In the FICMAT report, it speaks how the district had become an adult-centered system that focuses on the best interests of adults and not students. Board meetings, staff meetings, and energy was directed towards employees rather than students. In an effort, this also a quote, in an effort to meet the expense of an untenable teacher salary schedule and compensation package, the district decimated the management and classified staffing for student and operational systems, eliminated professional development, reduced facility program to areas essential only, and for at least 5 years until the state takeover, the administration and business services were shared with a local elementary district. So there was a diffusing of responsibility.
We're going to get you to wrap it up.
Okay. In each of those areas, facilities, fiscal, student achievement, personnel, community relations, and governance, there were many things that were out of place when I arrived. Unhealthy facilities, a past practice of generous community individuals being able to construct structures that did not go through the Department of State Architects. So now we have to certify that they're safe, and that requires additional services of engineers and architects to go back and redo what was been done in the past. Or community members being allowed to perform duties normally performed by CSEA members, which is in violation of the existing contract. We've had to reorganize the business department due to fiscal mismanagement, illegal activities, misappropriation of federal and state funds, fraud, requiring a FICMAT fraud audit, overpayment of staff, et cetera, et cetera. At the time I arrived, the average teacher's salary in the state was $61,000. The average teacher's salary in this district was 37% higher than that, and the top salary was $119,657, and that was for the minimum number of days to teach. Our students were not achieving. Our continuation schools had not been accredited for the previous 5 years, and both of the comprehensive high schools had lost their accreditation at least once within the previous 6 years. We had teachers that were misassigned, and we had the ineffectiveness of the leadership of the district and the governing board because of the multiple opportunities that they had to change their past practice of fiscal management. They chose not to do it. In summary, naturally, change brings forth discomfort for those who are resistant to change. And we are in the situation now of holding individuals accountable, ourselves included, because we want to do the best thing for students.
Okay, thank you. And we'll take your written testimony on that because those are some very important points that you made. Yes, sir.
Yes. Assembly members, thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Bruce Roberts, Natomas Unified School District. Also, I'd like to acknowledge two other board members here, Lisa Kaplan, Terry Burns, and our superintendent, Walt Hanline, have both come here for the support and the importance of this discussion. Yeah. We are one of the 13 districts that is currently negative certified. We are, so what we would like to present to you, and I've talked about, is a couple of recommendations, ideas that we have learned from our experience while being negatively certified since December 2009. Areas in which we've been making the hard decisions. We've been bringing about changes to bring ourselves to at least this point to be minimally we're qualified when we will present our December interim budget. But through this process, there is some real lessons that we've learned and I'd like to share with you. And what we feel is really, as we have worked to make these changes, we feel that it takes the whole team. It takes your staff, your administration, your board, as a board setting out policies and direction, but ultimately as you're working together to address your financial issues, because this is a financial issue that you're talking about with districts. And we look back at what took us right to the edge of this fiscal cliff, and it was really a delay process. It's not addressing our structural deficits. It's not addressing our and the time it takes to get in there and address those. We also look back at our district leadership, our legal counsel we had, and we say what could have improved our situation. And one of our recommendations we'd like to put forward here is the idea of a leadership advisor. We've had a fiscal advisor on board since we were identified as being negatively certified. But we want to present an idea of a leadership advisor, someone that, if we were to have someone with the capabilities of Dr. Bernard to come in to consult, both not only to the board, but also present potentially to the county to say, this is what I see. I see a number of things that they could address to make, that they could improve. A leadership advisor would then be giving advice to the board. You're still under district control, but that advice is known, and then it's a way to say, this is the things you should be looking at to address. We present some ideas of what the leadership advisor, how you might draw from them, perhaps, or perhaps FICMAT expands a list. Somehow it's a quantified list that is identified, and they're brought forward as these professionals that can give advice to your labor contracts, to your organization structure, to your staffing that might be, or to your overall educational focus that you're doing during this time. Additionally, our second recommendation we wanted to talk about was the idea that ultimately every district, every school district spends about 84 to 89% on salary and benefits of the three groups. Almost 9. So districts, if you're not addressing what's in your contracts, your electricity, your books, your training, are only about 11, 14% of your total budget. Those are the cuts the boards make up front. We wanted to then say, if negative certification is put forward, and this is identified by the county is the one that certifies you as negative. If that was to be one of our triggers, we identified a number of steps. The idea that we would have an accelerated timeline that allows a collective bargaining process to move forward. We respect and honor the aspects of collective bargaining. It's part of one of our tenets that we support and always want to see. But we look back at our history, and there is a delay and a slow process that's built into that system, which then moves you toward that fiscal cliff, because time is of the essence. You're running out of cash. And the idea that as you would then have this accelerated timeline only for negatively certified districts is one that your fiscal advisor and leadership advisor are assigned to the district. The other would be that within a certain period of time, perhaps 21 days, maybe a month or less than a month, either group could open, or we have a closed contract, could open and say, we would like to open any and all sections of the contract. You can't live behind a closed contract and say, we're not going to bargain. You're going to run out of money if state administrator is going to come in here in 6 months. Finally, with this, we'd like to say that then if you're not moving forward with that, then is there a process to accelerate the last, best, and final that moves you into a fact-finding process? And this, we laid out some timelines and some steps that could ultimately still respectful of the negotiation process, but we're just putting on a very focused timeline for only negatively certified districts.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. We ask you to submit, your ideas in writing to the committee so that we can, consider those going forward. Let me see if there are any questions of this panel, members of the committee. Okay. Thank you. Please, thank you so much for participating. This is a very important beginning, I think, looking at very serious policy. All right. Thank you. Next panel.
Raul Rodriguez, King City Joint Union High School. Gary Yee, Oakland Unified School District. Charles Ramsey, West Contra Costa Unified School District.
The originator of the statement.
Thank you.
We're the very first. Good morning.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We're asking people to give their testimony, give us a written testimony, but also give us 2 minutes of an overview now, and we'll keep the record open for additional submissions. So why don't we start with Oakland Unified?
Go ahead, Gary.
Chair's preference.
That's fine. I love Gary.
Thank you, Assemblymember Swanson. And as much as I love, and I've been a long-term resident, actually a lifelong resident of Oakland, I now have connections down in Santa Monica where my grandchildren go to Will Rogers, and they love it there. And And so I want to acknowledge Representative Brownlee for being a fantastic representative for education.
She is.
And I'd like to also acknowledge members of the Oakland community are in the back supporting, and they'll be giving some public testimony.
Right.
Well, you asked about the observations that we have about state receivership and recommendations and so forth. And I actually brought for the public record a paper that I presented to the American Educational Research Association in 2004, 1 year into our time. So I want to present that as public record.
We'll accept
but
it.
I summarized it in 5 reasons why we got in, and some of these are probably going to resonate, but I reviewed my documents. First, we had a demographic shift. In 2000, we went from a growing district to a flat district to a declining district. Secondly, we had underfunded mandates during that time that we didn't take care of, especially around special ed and ADA. 3, we had contracts that were unsustainable. For all the right reasons, we went from employing lots of emergency permitted teachers to trying to get credentialed teachers in every classroom. Fourthly, the state did a deferral. The state was doing deferrals in 2002, and we got hit with a cash flow problem at the very end. And fifthly, the union had, and with all due respect to the current leadership of the union, the OEA itself lobbied strongly for state takeover at the time. We, as you might recall, Jack O'Connell was the SPI at the time. He said 3 things: continuation of the academic excellence, fiscal stability and reliability, sustainability, and get out of town. And I'm proud to say he was able to succeed in 2 of those 3 goals. Because at the end of the takeover, when we received the district back, we found that we still had a structural deficit. We had not reconciled our cash flow, which was the problem in the beginning. And but when some of the board members said, well, we should wait until everything was settled, till the third rail was fixed. Those of us on the board believe that we're the best members to do that, and we have already undertaken to do that. We have our own recovery plan. We are actually closing, consolidating schools, and we imposed a contract which required class sizes to raise and other kinds of changes. Since the takeover, we've balanced our budget. We've continued to pay the loans. As I said, we've imposed a contract, closed schools. We initiated an audit committee. We hired an internal auditor, and we have worked with the State Controller's Office to resolve our current status. I want to thank Mr. Swanson for AB 609, which outlines all the specific needs that we need as a district, which really have to do with the penalties, the question of fairness around the penalties that were incurred during state administration. We know that there's some technicalities about Mr. O'Connell representing us as the board at the time, but fairness is what you put in your bill, and I appreciate that. The second thing that was really a landmark and important for us is Representative Skinner's AB 677, which gives us some flexibility around the sale of our surplus property. We need that in districts like Oakland, where we're facilities rich and cash poor. To accelerate the payback, we need to do some things different with our facilities, and we want to do that. We will do it. You'll hear it in this coming year. Recommendations for the budget for the takeover process as a whole. I'd like you to consider, as Mr. Montero said, that you implement trustees much earlier and state administrators much later. If you're going to bring in a state administrator, the state administrator should be trained and fully qualified and certified in the area that caused this takeover in the beginning. With all due respect to the state administrator, Randy Ward, who came in, he was not a fiscal expert, and it took 3 years before we got a fiscal recovery plan. If solving a $100 million loan, the first step is to take away cell phones because they weren't accountable, does that sound like the proper scale of solution that you need? If it's a fiscal problem, bring us a fiscal administrator. Secondly, audits need to be in real time. Unfortunately, the State Controller's Office audits did not really begin to kick in until we got a return to local control. Consequently, we're 3 years behind in the audit process, and we're being audited for things that we've already corrected. So the only way that I can see, and I've talked to FICMAT about this, is that the audit process, the state controller's office may be more appropriate in assigning and certifying independent auditors to come in and do the audits rather than doing it themselves. We know they're very busy. It's difficult for them to get in, but educational auditors know how to do those audits. They're doing them in all the other districts. They should probably be trained and certified to do it in these districts and take care of it. Fourthly,
we're going to wrap it up.
Okay. The fourth thing I want to pledge to the State Controller's Office, because there may be some misunderstandings about this, we pledge, and I pledge as the president of the school board, to work with the State Controller's Office to find some resolution to what may be inadvertent misunderstandings about the relative roles. We want to have a positive working relationship with them, and we stand here today to say we want to be able to do that. But those are my recommendations. I'll put them in writing.
President Ramsey.
Yeah, thank you. Charles Ramsey, President of the West Contra Costa Unified School District. I know your time is short, and so I'll keep it to the point. State takeover is a serious matter. And it's not just you sitting in this room today. It could be any of your colleagues in the State Assembly or State Senate who are affected and impacted by this decision. So your work here today is meaningful and relevant. The second thing I would want to recognize is that please review the Butt case. That's the originator from the state Supreme Court really talked about the source and reasons behind state takeovers. What is the purpose? What is the rationale? What is the reasoning behind? Then AB 1200, which was the enabling legislation that really put us, the district, West Contra Costa, into that position. There's four things that I want to point out that you have an impact and can do. Terms of the state loans. What are the interest rates? What are the loan structures? What are the yields? What is going to be created in terms of dealing with the school districts? It's not fair for school districts to be subject to a group of investors. That is not the responsibility under the education of what the state constitution says, a right to education for every child in the state of California. So please, in your duties, negotiate that. Make sure that your people do it. The Treasurer's Office, Bill Lockyer and others really get in there and see what they need to do, because they can set the terms and conditions by which the repayments have to have. It's outrageous for King City to have that kind of repayment plan, and they didn't mention the fact that interest rates are so low right now. Why don't they go out and refund those bonds so they can reduce the debt service on those accounts right now? Because that's what we did on one of our bonds that we did, not with you, but that's something I didn't hear today. That puzzled me and shocked me that didn't come before that committee, because they can be tasked with that, because your credit rating is a lot higher than King City's, and they're borrowing based on you. You have power to do that. The second thing is, and this is something important that you can do legislatively, stay and rescind is too broad. It currently says the state trustee can stay or rescind anything in their opinion that has a fiscal impact. So it's illusory to think that they really don't have the same control as a state administrator, because they can veto anything you do. I got in a big fight and argument this year because I told the state trustee I'm not going to spend $1.5 million of bond money to save $300,000. I had to go to Channel 7 and ABC and Channel 2, and finally she said, okay, I'll back off for 1 year. But there's no justification for that about closing the school on a $300 million budget. We're dealing with $300,000. So you have to look at that. That's the second thing that I would ask you to look at. The third thing that has been mentioned a lot is collective bargaining. It's important. I come from a history of collective bargaining, but the reality is that if you can't come to some agreement with your collective bargaining units, you're going to face a loan that's going to be so harsh and draconian that it's going to impact everybody, teachers, classified, students, parents, and the community. And I think what Gary would say, there has to be some process that you look at legislators, if they are getting a state loan, that there's some reduction in the collective bargaining timelines, because you just can't do it, because this thing is a crisis that takes place. And finally, my fourth and final point that I think that I didn't hear today, that I think the board has to have an annual meeting with the Department of Education to review the past performance of whether it's an administrator or a trustee, and look at accountability models, because that way, at least as you said, the lines of communication are taking place in communicating. I've been following what's been going on with AB 477. I don't know if everybody knows about Rod Wright's bill for Inglewood Unified, and it's very important and key, because in looking at what happens there, it's a tremendous problem when this trigger law is going to come into effect. And he talked about 13. It's going to be a lot more than that. And there's going to be some in my county as well, in Contra Costa County, and as you know, in Alameda County. Not just here. Hayward is another district that has been trying to find its way into solvency. And as it gets down into Southern California and the Central Valley, you're going to see more of this happening. So I just wanted to share those things. I think you have control. Those are things that you can do right now and that are meaningful as you frame your legislation. And I hope that you do some of these things, because I've been living with this for 18 years as a school board member of West Contra Costa.
Thank you for those ideas and points. School board member Rodriguez.
Thank you for having me. I'd like to thank Mr. Alejo for visiting us last week. He was at Greenfield High School. I'm Raul Rodriguez. I'm a school board member for the King City Joint Union High School District, which is under state and a state administrator. I'm also a parent of a senior in the high school. Interestingly enough, I'm also a parent of a 12-year-old who goes to another district, which is also taken over, which is a Greenfield Union School District. So you can imagine there's a lot of frustration in my community and in me personally, because my both sons in different districts go to two schools that are taken over. What I'd like to tell you is when the takeover happens, I want that the voice of the community and the parents and the students be just as important as getting back to fiscal solvency or whatever it's called. I think that if you look at our two high schools, the problems were as much academic as they were fiscal. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked a lot. And the more I serve on the board, the more I realize that training was so crucial. Our past board probably made some terrible choices. My understanding is that it's not a requirement to go through the Masters of Governance training that the School Board Association offers. I'm going through that, and our other board members are going through that, and I can't see how a board member can make good decisions without being trained. And it's my understanding that a lot of our board members that were part of the decisions that got us into the situations were not trained. And I'm not sure if this body has that authority, but I think it's critical for all board members to get training. And finally, I was involved in a couple of budget committees before the takeover. And on at least two occasions, I asked our county superintendent of schools, from seeing and hearing not only the committee, but the school board meetings, it was obvious we were headed for a train wreck. But things sort of just took their, took their course. And it seemed to me as a parent that we realized what was happening, and everybody sort of just let it happen. So now we have a 5% interest loan, and we're in a tough spot. So all these red flags were going up, and it seemed like the voice of the community went unheard. We're a highly Latino population. At my son's high school, it must be around 90% Latino. The town, probably much the same. And I think when it comes to the end of the day, the voice of the community and the students and their academic achievement sometimes takes a second place when it comes to fiscal matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we invite each of you to write us and also be available to meet with us. We're going to have smaller working groups where we can really address some of these issues and help us shape public policy. So with that, thank you very much, and we'd ask our next panel to come forward.
One final point is compensation for the state trustee. You have to review that as well. I think the costs to the districts are exorbitant. We pay $75,000 just to the state trustee.
Okay.
Please make a note of that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to comment that I think these school board members, community leaders are really extraordinary, and despite the fiscal issues that you've had to address. Your community's done a really wonderful job by electing you, and I feel very reassured listening to all of you about how knowledgeable you are about the issues and the recommendations that you're making to us. So thank you.
And it really points out that there is a lot of work that lies ahead of us.
Well, I want to thank you for keeping the issue alive.
Yeah, and one last thing I would like to note, just to not leave it in blank. I think that we being a highly Latino school district and school in town, I think that at least the state, the administrator they appointed, I thought was a really great fit, and I appreciate all his interest in not only looking at the school but looking at the community, who we are, and our needs. So I hope that's how it happens everywhere. The administrator fits the community, because I think ours is really good.
Yeah, Mr. Mata.
Well, I'm going to excuse the panel as you are being excused. I did want to mention that as the chair of aging and long-term care, while I certainly support paying anyone what they're worth, it seems to me that with the many people that are retiring from government service or corporate service, I would hope that we could find a number of people who would be willing to assist local districts in many walks of life for free. I mean, why do we feel we have to pay exorbitant rates to help community? I mean, I'm a social worker too, so we've already taken a vow of poverty. But I would think that with the baby boomers retiring, there is a cadre that could be developed. I'm going out on a limb here, but I would be very happy to be working with the chair of this committee to see, can we return to a sense of communitarianism in this state at a time when we need people to step up to help, especially those most impoverished and vulnerable communities.
Thank you.
Just a statement.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank these school board members for serving during a very difficult time. Most people would usually back away from a very tough challenge, and they stuck in there. So thank you for your service. And I think they made a good point, is that the trustee does have to, part of that process of coming into any community when you're seen as an outside person, is engage and invite the community, take that input into account, because that's where you get a lot of tension, a lot of anger and frustration when folks in a community feel that they're not being heard. Last Friday, after I visited the school district, we had over 200 people in midday come to a meeting because of different issues going on in the district. And for me, I'd never been to a meeting that big in a very small community, and made it have over 200 people show up wanting to express their opinions about how this process has taken place. So certainly, when trustees are appointed to take over a school district, it has to be sensitive to those community needs and always engage the community. The process, the procedures are critical in this very difficult process that a school district will undergo.
Our trustee, hold on. I want to follow up on this point. Our trustee has never met with the community in 18 years. Has never met with the community. You have hit on a point. They're incredibly frustrated. They don't understand who's in charge. They don't know why things are happening. And then the board has to go out and take all the abuse when it's the state trustee who's using their stay and rescind powers and not meeting with the constituents. All of you have to meet with your constituents at some point. All of you are held accountable by the voters. You should require them. That's why I said the annual meeting, so at least the public will know what's going on with their tax. Remember, this is taxpayer money. Whether it's the state of California, whether it's a local district, it's the people's money.
Sure.
And the people are not being able to know what's going on. And you, Luis, you spotted it correctly. It's the people, whether it's Natomas, whether it's down in Santa Monica, or whether it's in Oakland. Or any other district, the people have a right to know what's going on with their process.
Mr. Chair, could I just comment on the trustee issue? I have a different experience with our state trustee now that we're out of state administration. We actually recommended and got the retired CFO of our county. So we have somebody that actually knows our budget, and to my knowledge, she hasn't stayed or rescind anything that we've done since we've been back to local control.
You should all know that it is a plan of the committee to hold some field hearings, and so we will get into this and some detail in West Contra Costa as well as Oakland and King. So we will be looking at these
It's
issues.
going to be more, Sandra.